let's talk about it. Let's talk about a plan, right? And the plan is simply this one. It's an accounting of our spending, right? We ought to know where we're spending money on so we know how we're doing with those things. Because here's the truth of the matter. Our money is going somewhere, right? And the reality is a lot of us don't know all those somewheres where our money's going, right? We've subscribed to stuff that we forgot we subscribed to. We've put on autopilot, auto pay at the end of the month, and it just happens, and we don't know what that amount is. We kind of just happens. And while our money is going somewhere, we should know where it's going. I think most of us would agree with that. That's pretty basic. That's not like earth-shattering. Nobody's sitting there thinking, like, Mike, how did you come up with that? We all know that, right? That our money goes somewhere, and somebody ought to know where it's going. And when I talk about a plan, I have good news for the majority of us. I'm not talking about a budget. So everybody can kind of relax. We're not talking about a budget because I know very few people that like budgets. Most people don't enjoy it. Some people really like them, but most of us are like, ugh, right? Because here's the reality. A budget is a theory that doesn't always reflect reality, right? Because at the start of the month, we say we're going to spend this much on, heating our house, right? Then you have a cold month like January was, right? And it's like, that kind of went out the window, right? But the budget says we can only spend this much. Well, that's not going to work. And so we get real frustrated because it's so kind of set in stone, and it's set in stone ahead of the game. In fact, the problem with the budget is that it assumes a defined future, that we're only going to spend X amount of dollars on our heating bill this month, or on our gas bill this month, or our food bill this month. The problem is we can't predict the future. As much as we try, right? We can't control it. We can't always predict it. In fact, a budget reminds us whether we've stayed in budget or haven't. That's why it frustrates a lot. It isn't like an encouraging thing. It's like we're just reminded all the times where we went over the budget. It's like, now what do we do, right? And we got to stay in budget, stay in budget, stay in budget. I love how somebody put it. A budget is a mathematical confirmation of our suspicions, right? Our suspicions is it's going somewhere, right? And it's like, now we have the numbers, actually, which doesn't make us feel great. And the reality is, for most of us, it doesn't work. And there's a reason why a budget doesn't work, and it's a very simple one. We've talked about this before. And it's going to make us a little bit uncomfortable, but you know this is true. Right? Because if you've ever done a budget, especially if you've done a budget with somebody else, right? You're married, you're a couple, and you're doing a budget together. There's certain items that you don't want to cut out of the budget because you don't want to say no to you, right? You like having your nails done, like having your hair done. I don't have to worry about that, but some of you, you spend a lot of money on that, right? It's like a big deal. And I'm not downing that. I'm just saying, we kind of say we categorize those things as the essentials, right? Because this doesn't just happen on its own, right? And so it's an essential piece, right? And so that's why we don't like budgets. We have a hard time saying no to us because we like us and we want to provide for us. We kind of like the stuff that our money does for us, right? That provides for us, the streaming services, all the different streaming services we have subscription to, all that stuff because we occasionally watch something there and we don't want to miss that thing. And that's why budgets don't work for most of us, is that we have a hard time saying no to us. And there's another reason that budgets, I'm not a big fan of budgets, and simply this, that life happens. And all of us at some time in our life have had life happen, right? Something that, we had this budget. Even if we were working the budget, it was going good, and then something happens, right? We go from 2 incomes to 1, right? Maybe, somebody got pregnant and can't work, or maybe, situations changed and jobs changed, right? And now you go from 2 to 1, and that's a hard drop for most of us, which is going to affect the bottom line of our budget. Maybe we lose a job, right? Maybe we lose one of those jobs. Not just a job that we can go out and find another one so easy, but maybe we were making like stupid money and we knew it was stupid money, and now we aren't making stupid money. It's like there's no way anybody else will be stupid enough to give us that amount of money. So, what are we going to do now, right? That's going to affect our budget. We change jobs, and changing jobs, sometimes there's that, that gap of when we get our last paycheck and we get our next one, right? There's that gap. We move, right? And if you've moved, there's all these additional unexpected life happens cost, right? The first and last months if you're renting, right? Or, signing up and putting deposits on things. It's just like those hit our budgets. Some of you, it's school, right? Maybe it's past school, that gift that continues to give for seems like forever, right? Paying off that student loan. Or maybe it's like you've just chosen to put your kids in a private school because you think that's the best thing for them. And you see the numbers and you're like, whoa, that's going to throw the budget way off, right? And then you have those unexpected expenditures that come with life. And I'm not talking about, it's late in the afternoon and you just need to pick me up. So that's that extra, large American Grande, cappuccino, cremola, whatever the thing is, that, or those really cute shoes. That's not the unexpected expenditures I'm talking about, right? This is like, the water heater blows up, right? The car dies, right? You got to do something. It wasn't in the budget, right? Even though you kind of plan a little bit for that, it's like not that amount. And we're driven back to the reality of life as life happens. That is that, wondering how much came in and how much went out. And here's the simple question to ask when we're doing an accounting, working this plan. It's simply this. Are we good with that? Are we good with the amount that comes in? Maybe we can't change that, right? Unless we get a different job or had another job, right? Or work something out. But if, that's coming in. But what goes out? Are we good with what's going out? Because what if one reason we feel like things are tight is because we don't know where it goes or where it went? What if our lack of knowledge contributes to our kind of anxiety about things feeling tight? I'm going to tell a little story about my father-in-law, not because he gave me permission, just because it happened and I thought I'd tell it. He'd come a few years ago to live with us. Some stuff has happened in life. So he said, hey, well, come live with us, right? So he comes to live with us. And every day he was just stressing about could he afford to live? Could he afford to live? And so we started this thing where once a week we went out to dinner together, just he and I, have guy talk, and we always went to the exact same place, Denny's, because he had a high level for food there. And it was funny, we'd order a certain thing and he'd be like, I don't think I could eat all that food. And it's like, but it's a better deal, Newell, and you're worrying about money. This is a better deal. And every time he ate all of it, right? So we're sitting there one night and I'm like, let me help you, Newell. Let me just get a napkin here. Let's do this real simple. How much money do you have coming in? Here's what your Social Security is, his retirement. Okay, here's the number, here's the total number. Let's look through your bills. This is how much you spend on this. Look at this, Newell. I had it written down on paper. I put it in front of him. I said, you're clearing like $500 a month. To which he looked at me, and Newell is like around 90 years old. He looked at me and said, I've never had $500 at the end of any month in my whole life. To which I thought, yes, you did, Newell. You weren't aware of it, right? You weren't kind of able to track it. And this is a guy that ran a business, so it isn't like he wasn't aware of those things, but just for whatever reason, it was just a thing for him. And just to be able to look at the numbers and see it was able to at least relieve that stress in his life. Now, he found something else to stress over, and I discovered that was just who my father-in-law is, right? You got to have something to stress over, so, I didn't worry so much about it after that. But it is this reminder that sometimes we feel tight because we don't know where it goes, right? And then anxiety goes up and we get kind of stressed because of that. And maybe some of us sitting here today, maybe we're in a place where things aren't tight, right? You're making pretty good money. Life's good right now. You kind of hit that sweet spot, right? Things are good. You're not having to stress about buying this, getting a little bit extra, going on vacations aren't a big deal. And if you're in that spot, let me ask you a question. What if the more we have, the more we make, the closer attention we should pay to where it's going? Which I know you want to push back and say, Mike, I don't have to worry about that, right? Because I have enough. But what if having more really means you ought to pay closer attention? And it's not because we have to, but because it's in our best interest to. And not just your interest, but other people's. In fact, there's this guy, he goes by the moniker Professor G. He's an economist. He writes about this stuff, has a blog, has some really insightful stuff to talk about, managing money. And here's what he said. He said, it's not your income, but your income to expense ratio that determines if you're rich. Which, when you think about it, makes sense, right? It's not how much we're making, it's about how much we're not only making, but how much we're spending. And if we're making more than we're spending, then, that gives us a chance to feel rich. In fact, he went on to say, it's not your salary, but your spending habits that determine your financial well-being, no matter what your salary is. But here's something that's not a religious thing, it's just a human nature thing. If we don't have to be careful, we're not, right? It's why, you turn on the sink, you're running some water, and you walk over to the refrigerator while the water's running, not doing anything, just running, right? Because, hey, it's just water, right? I mean, it's not really our water, it's just water. We pay for it, but it's not that expensive. So we don't have to, it's why when you wash your car, when at some point after all the snow and yucky weather, you're going to wash your car. And if you don't got one of those fancy ends of the hose, you're going to throw the hose on the lawn because at least it's watering something, right? But you just let the water run. Because if we don't have to be careful, we're not, right? In fact, the reality is we don't treat stuff that isn't ours that well either. That's why you should never buy a rental car. Because we've all driven rental cars, right? And you know how it is. It's like, I wonder how fast this little 3-cylinder car would go. You rev it up and spin it out. Because, hey, it's not your car, right? You're going to return it back in, right? As long as it's running when you get it back and it isn't, damaged, you're all good with it, right? It's why we, when we go on vacation in a motel and the water, spills out of the shower, gets all over the floor, we don't freak out like we would at home, right? The home, it's like, no, we can't damage the floor. Here, it's like, not our place, right? There's just something in us as human beings that, we don't treat stuff that isn't ours as well as we treat our stuff. But there is an exception. An exception is when our jobs are at stake. Like at work, and some of us work with budgets, right? It's like a really tight budget, and it's like, I got to stay within that budget because if I don't, I'm going to hear about it, and if I hear about it enough, I may not have a job, right? So when we have something that's on the line, we tend to treat things a little more carefully. In fact, Jesus talked about this in one of his famous parables, these made-up stories to make a point that he often told. And this particular one comes in Matthew chapter 25, and the scenario is, this is down towards the end of Jesus' life here on this earth. He's been having, he and the boys have gone to the temple. They're already in Jerusalem for the last time. And Jesus is talking these big ideas about, what it looks like when he comes back again. And when is that going to be? And he begins to tell these stories that are related to his return. And one of them in this list, I think it's like 3 or 4 different made-up stories he goes through. He tells this one. And he starts it the way he does some of his parables. And if you're not familiar with parables, again, are made-up stories that Jesus made up to simply tell a point. And often, in the majority of them, somebody represents God and somebody represents people. Sometimes a specific group of people, but in general, people in general. And this one is not hard to figure out. So here's where he begins. He says, listen, the kingdom of heaven is like, that's how he starts. And he's telling us this is not like what heaven is like, but this is the kingdom of heaven. This is like not someday, but like right now, this is what I hope, what God hopes will take place here on this planet. This is what the kingdom of heaven looks like in those that are my followers, right? The kingdom of heaven looks like a man who was going on a trip. And pretty quick, we're going to find in the story that this guy isn't just a guy, but he's like a rich guy, which tells us as we look at the story, this represents God. So I'm just going to help you out front. This is God. Now, it doesn't mean God is going on a trip. It's just this picture of he's telling the story, and this is the representation. He says, listen, there's this guy, a really rich guy, and he's going on a trip. And before he leaves, he calls in all of his servants, and he tells them, and I love what he says, he tells them to take care of whose things? His things while he was gone. Entrusted his possessions to them. And that's an important point that Jesus makes. That this guy's leaving, he says, hey, I'm leaving you my possessions. I'm leaving you my billfold. I'm leaving my stuff, and I want you to take care of it while I'm gone. And not that he doesn't want them to take care of it, he wants them to manage it while he's gone. And so, Jesus says he gave the rich guy gives one servant 5 bags of gold, 5 talents. Is how some of your versions of your Bible say a talent represented enough money for 20 years worth of the average person's salary. So for our sake, we're going to say it's $100,000 a year. While that may not be true, it's just easier for me because I'm not really good at math. So $100,000 a year, 10 years is $1 million. So 20 years salary, $2 million is what a talent is. The first guy, he gives 5 talents, which means he got $10 million. Just say it, $10 million. A lot of money, right? Second guy, he gives 2 bags, right? And 2 bags would be how many million? Sharp crowd today, 4 million, that's right. And the last guy, he gives 1 bag of gold, 1 talent, which he gets how many? $2 million, right? Nobody gets a small, and Jesus followers, when they hear this, are like, wow, this guy's really, really rich, right? Because, you start doing the numbers, that's a lot. Everybody gets millions of dollars to invest, that is entrusted to them to handle it. But Jesus then adds a little part to the story, which is an interesting part because when we hear it, we go, makes us go, because he says, by the way, he gave each one of these guys as much as he could handle, according to his ability, which meant some guys could handle a lot of millions and some could only handle a couple of million, which, by the way, I think most would be glad to say, pick me, right? I'm glad to handle a couple of million. But it's like, is this, according to ability? Is that how God gives us stuff? I don't know if that's true, but that's part of the story. It ought to make us stop and think about, maybe what I have is what I have because it's what I can handle. Then Jesus says, the rich guy leaves. He takes off. He's divided up his money to entrust it to these guys, and he leaves. And so the servant, the guy who got the 5 bags, right? The guy who got the $10 million, he puts the money to work. And he, lo and behold, he makes another 5 more talents, right? So no, this is like, how many millions was it before? He's got like $20 million now, right? This guy he's doing a good job. And in fact, in the same way, the servant who had 2 invested, right? The guy who had $4 million, he trades with them, he invests in them, and he gets 2 more. He's now up to $8 million. Thank you, Grace. Somebody's adding quicker than I am. All right, $8 million, right? But the servant who got the $2 million, went out and he dug a hole in the ground and hid the master's money, which seems like a crazy thing to do because that's a lot of money. And why would you just bury it in the ground, right? And so in the story, Jesus says, after a long, long time, the master comes home. When he gets home, he asks what seems reasonable, right? He says, what'd you do with my money? Time to go over the counts. Kind of come in and tell me how things have gone, guys. I've been gone quite a while. Tell me how you did with what I entrusted you with. And so Jesus says the servant who had got the most at the start, he comes in with his 5 bags of gold, and he brings 5 more, and he sets it down on the table in front of the master and says, Master, look here, right? You trusted me to care for your 5 bags of gold, and here's what I did. I used it, and I doubled your money. I got 5 more. To which I love in the story how Jesus says the master responds. The master is ecstatic, right? The master says, hey, you did well. I mean, you did really good. I think you got a big smile. You did a great job, right? You are a good and loyal. You're a good, faithful servant, right? Because wouldn't you say that to somebody who doubled your money? Especially that kind of money? It'd be like, wow, you're really good and you're faithful, you're loyal, right? And oh, by the way, because you were loyal, you're faithful with just a few things, which he wants his crowd then and even us today to go, a few things, Jesus, that's not a few things, that's a lot of stuff, right? But according to Jesus, the rich guy just uses a few things. Because you're so good with a few things, I'm going to put you in charge of many things, which means a whole lot more zeros behind those numbers. And then he ends with this great line. He says, come on in, share my joy with me. Let's have a party, right? Let's celebrate this great success. Let's celebrate you as such a good, faithful servant, right? Enter in the joy of my master is how it says. We're going to celebrate tonight because this has been a good trip and it's been a really good return. Then the second guy comes in. The guy, he's got his, he had his 2 bags of gold, right? And he comes in and has almost an identical conversation with the master. He says, here, I got your 2 and I got 2 more. To which the master's like, man, you did a good job. You did a good job with that little, even though that little was a lot, right? Because now we're at 4 million, now we're at 8 million, right? It's like, well, you did good. And he does the same thing, hey, you've been faithful and loyal. Come on in. Come and celebrate. Join the party, right? We're having a party. Tonight we're going to, we're doing up great. We're going to celebrate what you guys have done for me. Then the servant who had been given 1 bag of gold, the $2 million, comes to the master. And I think when he comes, he kind of comes quietly and kind of head down. He says, Master, I knew that you were hard. You were an exacting, demanding man, right? And we looked at this passage just the last series, right, about, excuses. And he begins his excuses. You're really tough. You earn money where, you shouldn't. You kind of capitalize on things. You do so great. And I was afraid of, just how you handle it. So here's the good news, Master. Here's your 1 bag of gold. Here's your $2 million, which is good that I gets back the $2 million. Here's what's yours. To which the master has a totally different response to the guy who gave him back exactly what he started with. Because the master says to him, you are a wicked and lazy servant. which is a whole lot different from being a good and loyal, good and faithful one, right? Wicked and lazy, harsh language. You should have put my gold in the bank, right? Because then when I came home, I would have received what was mine back with interest. At least I would have got a little interest on this, right? I would have got something for the time that you've had it. But now I have nothing because you didn't do anything with it. The story ends with some kind of harsh language. We talked about it last series. Go back and listen to it, my explanation of that. But here's the point. The point wasn't the amount each of them was asked to manage, even though they were big amounts. That wasn't the point. The point was what they did with what they were asked to manage. And here's the question that was asked of each of the guys when they showed up in front of the rich boss. What did you do with what I gave you? What did you do with what I gave you? And here's where maybe our lives and our stories have a little connection with this story. Especially if you're a follower of Jesus. If you're not a follower of Jesus, if you're not kind of a religious person, you're here for whatever reason, right? You don't have to listen to this. You don't have to believe any of this. But for those of us that are followers of Jesus, we kind of got to believe this stuff because this is what Jesus taught. And here's the question. What if that's still the question? Which ought to make us all feel just a little more tense at this moment, right? What if it's still the question? What do we do with what we were given? I mean, let's take this a step further. What if we're managers and not owners? In fact, maybe the hardest thing to think about, what if it's not ours? The stuff that we call ours, our house, our car, our money. What if it's not ours? And I know the pushback we immediately have is, no, Mike, hold it here. We earned it. You don't know how I earned it, right? But we earned this thing. We worked for it. I worked long hours. It's crazy the job I do, and I'm not doubting that. We put in the hours. We have all these responses of why it ought to be ours. I mean, our name is on the paycheck, right? It says right there, it's made out to me. So it must be mine. It's deposited in our account. We have all this pushback. But what if the story Jesus was telling wasn't just a made-up story, but was an accurate portrayal of how God hopes his kingdom looks, and the people that are part of that kingdom will believe and actually think about their lives in this way. Because what if we're accountable for how we're managing what we have? Because if we are, if that story is more than just kind of a story to, remind us of, being careful with stuff, what if it's like, this is really about whose this is and whose it isn't and what the whole role of it is. And even all of us know this is true, that it's not ours. And how we know it's not true, it's not ours, is that when we die, we don't take it with us. Somebody else gets it, right? That's a cold, hard fact. It's kind of something we don't really want to talk about, but it's true. That's why it's important. That's why I hope some of you will stay around later for this Wills and Trust Q&A that's going to happen right after this service. Chance to kind of talk about that, because that's a really important thing. So you have a say on where the stuff that you've spent all this time earning, growing, goes to the people you want it to go to, right? That you have some say over it. But the reality is, when you're done, it goes to somebody else. So let me talk to you. We've been trying each week to give you sort of a practical, hands-on thing to go home and do about it. So today I'm going to talk to you about a 2-month challenge, which ought to be good news because I'm only talking about 2 months, right? I'm not talking about 3 months, not talking about 6 months, not talking about a whole year, right? Let's just look at 2 months. And my suggestion would be look at the spending for 2 months. And I would suggest, while you could go back to January and maybe even February now, we're getting late enough in the month, or you can go back to December and January. I'd prefer if you skip those months and maybe wait until February and March, so you have to wait a little bit to do this homework, because here's what I expect, that in January and even in February, maybe you're still paying off something that happened in December. Remember that big thing that happened in December? Where people got together and you gave them stuff and you got stuff and you were like, really, this is what you got me? Did you see what I got you, right? That whole thing, right? Where you felt obligated to buy stuff for people, right? So that kind of skews everybody's budget. Everybody's budget is out of whack because of our over expenditures, our not thinking it through kind of moments there. So let's kind of take that off the board so we're not having to sort of use that as an excuse, but just look at some regular months, as regular as months can be, right? Look at the spending for a month And here's the question to ask. Where's it going? Where's it going? And then the follow-up question. You only have two questions as you look at your 2-month spending. Where's it going, and are we good with that? And if you're good with that, you're good with that, right? But it's a helpful question to ask. Where's it going, and are we good with it? Are we good with this money going out to that? What are we getting back for that? Really, we just have a subscription so that if we want to use it, then we get a chance to pay more for it. Is that really what we want to do? But while those are two simple questions, there's some other parts to it that'll make it a little less comfortable for a lot of us. And that's simply this, that if you're a couple, do it together, right? Do it together, because it doesn't make sense for one of you to do it and the other one not to do it, because that's just going to create problems. I'm not trying to create problems for you, right? And if you don't like what you see, adjust things. Everybody gets to adjust things. Everybody gets to have some say in those pieces. That's it. That's the 2-month challenge. Not hard. Pretty simple, pretty straightforward. Where's it going, and how are we good with it, right? But here's what I know about us just as people. Some of us right now are thrilled. Some of us not. In fact, some of you are sitting there right now, and you're just seething at me. Mike, you have no idea what you just stirred up, right? You're mad at me. You may even hate me. You can't wait for me to finish so you can get me before I get to the door and give me a talking to. The strange thing is the person you're with today would love to come up here right now and give me a big hug, right? Because they'd be like, oh man, thank you so much for bringing this. Well, I've been watching. I just know how it is. When people get around money, people get, kind of strange and weird about it, right? And I understand that because we kind of think it's our money and we don't want anybody else, getting into our stuff. We don't like people disrupting this stuff, and we like kind of how things are going. But sometimes we need to just disrupt a little bit so that we can be a little clearer on how things are working for us. So again, just track it, talk about it, and adjust it. Those are the 3 steps. Pretty straightforward, pretty simple. So again, you don't have to come up with a budget and how much money we're going to spend and all this. Look and see how much is getting spent. If you don't like it, adjust it. Maybe we decide we're going to invest in sweaters and blankets, and everybody's going to freeze around the house for a while. I don't know what you do, but that's the way to adjust or to cut stuff out. And sometimes we don't want to cut stuff out, so then we make some other adjustments. But answer those questions, where did the money go? And what's it doing for us when it goes, right? And a lot of times it's doing good stuff, right? It's paying, our mortgage, it's paying our rent, it's paying our car loan, it's paying for all those pieces. But, what is it doing for us? And what are we doing for us? Are we thinking about ways to use our money in a way that's setting us up for what's coming later? For the unexpected expenditures for later when we hope to retire at some point in life, right? And not have to worry about working. In fact, I'm going to put up on the screen a thing that if you want to get your phones out, you want to take a picture of this. If you want to, think about doing this and maybe are thinking about some tools to help with all this, here's the website, RamseySolutions.com/tools. This is from Dave Ramsey. Dave Ramsey is the guy who designed the Financial Peace University, which is upstairs running right after this service. And it's great. They're all free. It gives you, calculate everything from retirement to mortgage. If you pay a little bit more in your mortgage, $100 a month, how quickly that would change things. It has a budgeting thing if you want to do that. If it has just a review thing, it gives you a chance to track all those pieces. It's great tools, all free. Love to share that with you. Because here's the reality. For most of us, our income drives our spending. And what I mean by that is simply if you make $45,000, you know what? You probably spend about $45,000 a year. And if you make, $75,000, you're going to spend $75,000. If you make $100,000, you're going to spend $100,000. If you make, $200,000, which is like, well, that's a lot, you're going to spend $200,000. If you make like $450,000, because I know there are some people that make like that, some of us are thinking, no. No, if we made that much, we wouldn't spend it all. But the reality is, we have it, so we spend it. And some of us have had this experience because some of us are making money now that 20 years ago we thought if I ever made that much money, life would be sweet, right? Let's be honest, right? We thought, man, if I ever made that much, whoo, baby, I wouldn't have any worries in the world. And now you're making that much, and you have just as many worries as you did then. And there's a reality for that. That is that our current habits follow us up the pay scale. If we have these kind of habits that we kind of enjoy, they just kind of go up. And the crazy thing is, the financial pressure follows us as well. And again, it doesn't make sense to us because we push back and we say, hey, if we made that much money, how could we have any financial pressure? And the answer is, yeah, sure, you still have a car payment. You just probably have a more expensive car payment because if you're making that kind of money, why are you still driving that beater, right? You're going to drive a really nice car, right? And if you're driving a really nice car, you don't want to park it in a really junky place, so you got to have a place that's commensurate. So you have a mortgage, but it's probably a higher mortgage, right? All those things just kind of drive up. It's just how life works for us. As has been said by multiple people throughout time, sometimes, even hooked to music, more money, more problems, right? And it's just the reality of how our relationship with money works. And why talking about a relationship is so important. Because it impacts so many other relationships in our lives. And it's the one we least like to talk about. We least like to deal with it. For some of us, we really get frustrated by it. And maybe like the guy in Jesus' made-up story, who didn't do anything with the money other than to bury it, right? Make sure I can return it just as it was. I think there's some truth that we're afraid. We're afraid when we start talking about, accounting for where money goes. Because truth is, we're afraid of what we'll find. Some of us will find some stuff and we'll be like, what a knucklehead I'm on. I should have canceled it. I don't know why I didn't cancel it. It keeps going. I keep telling myself I ought to do it, right? But we don't do it, and then we find out how much it was costing us. We're like, some of us are just beat ourselves up kind of people. So, we're afraid of that. Sometimes we're afraid that, the other person in our life is going to find out, how we spend our money. And it's like, hey, we kind of talked about this is my money, but it's like, still isn't a good look. So maybe we're afraid that what we're spending on, what we want to spend on, even if we shouldn't spend it on, right? We're afraid of somebody finding out that, right? That was like, I know we shouldn't spend this, but I kind of like spending this, and so I don't really want anybody else knowing it. And for some of us, if we're honest, we're afraid because we won't know what to do. We don't know what to do if we get there and discover that after 2 months, and maybe we think, let's check a couple other months and make sure, see how true that is. And we check a couple other months, and maybe we look past last year's months, and it's like we keep going over what we're bringing in. We keep our credit card bills keep getting higher. We're just paying the minimum, which is a sure sign that things are out of whack, right? And sometimes, I don't have the choice, and I understand, but that's where we get in this moment where we're like, we don't know what to do. And when we don't know what to do, for a lot of us, we just freeze, right? We kind of stick our heads down because we're embarrassed, we're frustrated, we're worried. That's one of the reasons, we're trying to do like financial peace, and we're doing some other stuff to try to be helpful to people in general about figuring out ways to be better at managing what we have. And some of us, if we're honest, the reason we don't want to do this 2-month thing is we're going to have a fight, right? Because you know that you and your spouse, right, your significant other, you know that you see money in 2 different ways, right? It means different things to you, and you've thought about it before, and you're like, I don't really want to do this, Mike, because it's just going to be another fight. But what if we shifted how we approached all that? What if we didn't approach it? We got to cut stuff out, and we're just going to go in, and you have to cut stuff out, or if you don't cut it out, I'm going to cut it. What if we approach it in a whole different way? What if paying attention can actually help make life better? And what I mean by that is, what if it could help us live with less stress, less anxiety, less worry? What if just having that knowledge of where it's going and we're okay with where it's going just can kind of lower some of that worry of, I'm not sure where we're at, I'm not sure how we're doing. Because not being sure is a sure sign to have stress, to have anxiety, and have worry. Here's the reality. We can't control everything in life. And at some age, you discover how true that is, right? And we can't. But what if we control what we can? Something to think about today.